if you're trying to build a company, especially at the highest level, with all of the different moving pieces, you're going to learn a lot about yourself, issues, questions that you've had, you've avoided confronting about yourself. You have to deal with them and face them head on. Your strengths and your weaknesses are highlighted and brought to the fore for everyone to see, especially yourself.
Welcome back to another season of Third Culture Africans. I'm proud to say Africa's #1 award-winning career and entrepreneurship podcast, voted for by you at the African Podcast and Voice Awards. I am Zezere Ekezie-Joseph, your host. I'm obsessed with all things entrepreneurship, and our show is dedicated to igniting your entrepreneurial journey, sharing resources, and giving you the tools to pursue your dreams fearlessly. We celebrate artistry and stories from those brave enough to create something and succeed. Inspiring, motivating, and full of wonder, discover how those who succeed do it. Your support helps make this show bigger and better. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and join our community with weekly newsletters curated just for you. Let's connect on Instagram and Facebook at Third Culture Africans. Sit back, relax, and let's do this. Hi, Kennedy. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Third Culture Africans.
Hi, it's really great to be here.
I got your profile through someone on your team. And oftentimes, for most guests on the show, I feel like I already know them. But it's incredible what you've been able to achieve in your career. And I guess being one of Africa's stroke Nigeria's unicorns in terms of Fintech, I tend to sort of do an intro for each guest on the episodes. But I think you probably would do your introduction better justice than I would, because I've seen how great a speaker you are. And so I guess if you can tell everyone listening a little bit more about you and what you're known for and what you're hoping to actually achieve by your current endeavors.
For sure. Really great to be here again. My name is Kennedy Ekezie. I'm 24 years old. I was born and raised in Nigeria. Today, I'm the CEO of Kippa. Kippa is a financial technology company regulated by the Central Bank of Nigeria that's providing digital accounting and payment software for small businesses across Nigeria. Since our inception over 2 years ago, a little under 2 years ago, more than 500,000 businesses have used our product. Before Kippa, I lived and worked in Beijing for 2 years. Right before I left Beijing, was on the founding team for the Africa business at TikTok, handling user growth and acquisition for the product expansion into Africa, specifically focused on 3 countries: Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. Before TikTok, I started my career. My first job out of college was at a management consulting firm called Accenture. Accenture worked on projects locally for the federal government and for multinational and other private organizations in Nigeria. My parents are university professors, so I spent most of my time with them growing up on a university campus. I have 4 siblings today. A lot of who I am today was shaped by my interactions with my siblings growing up. I still work with my brother. He's my co-founder at the company and is the president at Kippa. And the goal for us with what we're building, and the way I think about my personal North Star, I think about it as engineering economic prosperity for Africa. I think that is the foundational lever that needs to be pulled, that will change the narrative around a lot of conversations that we have. But I think, economic prosperity is the bane of a lot of the problems that we experience as a continent today, even for those who are abroad. And I think it's my life's mission to chip away at that problem.
Incredible. You missed a few things in your wonderful intro, though.
I'm sure
You
I
missed
did.
a few. So let me just help you because, got to give you your flowers. So you've been recognized with a few awards in your tenure and in entrepreneurship. So as a young African leader under President Barack Obama, as well as the Queen's Young Leader Award from the late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. At one point, you were ranked the highest competitive debater in Nigeria.
Yeah, for 2 years in a row.
How did that come about?
So I went to university in Nigeria. I went to University of Calabar, where my parents also teach. And all through my 4 years at University of Calabar, I competed. I was a competitive debater. And by far and large, the University of Calabar had the most significant investment by any Nigerian university in debate. We treated it like a sport, and we had a very robust and competitive team. And what that meant was we got to compete every year with the best and brightest students from universities across the country. So every summer we assembled our teams, and it was competition with about 250 to 400 other students who represent the best and brightest students from their universities. And at the end of those tournaments, there's so what it looks like is you go through 9 different debate rounds where you get to compete. In micro rounds, there's a quarterfinal, a semifinal, and a final. At the end of this, like every speech you do is ranked by the judges. And so what it means to be the best debater is out of all the students, between 250 and 400 students, I was ranked number 1. So accumulated the most number of highest scores across the entire, which is no mean feat, for sure.
I can imagine. I guess now you see why I let you do your own introduction.
Yeah.
You're quite young, and a few questions that I'm sure everyone wants to know about. But before we sort of jump into those questions, you went to university to study philosophy. How does a philosophy graduate go ahead and start up one of Nigeria's successful fintech businesses?
Yeah, I think it's something people tend to misunderstand, right? Like that, there needs to be a direct correlation between what you study and, what you eventually go on to do. And for me, I think of what you study as having an impact on who you become. And for me, what that was philosophy allowed me to think from first principles. It also provided a mirror for very significant self-examination. And I think that's the way I like to learn and the way I like to study. When I read a book, for example, I don't just read the words and the letters and, enjoy the story and the narrative. It's what aspects of me are reflected here. And that's why I really like, to read like history and watch documentaries. What aspect of me is present in the literature I'm reading? And how can I, as a result of that reflection, become a better person? I think studying philosophy for 4 years definitely made me much better. I felt like it was also an unfair advantage because as a debater, I felt like everything I learned in class, all of the books I had to read, like very directly had a consequence on my ability to be a very good debater. So I think that was my kind of unfair advantage. And post that, I think combining studying philosophy with like being a debater with working on a social enterprise, it helped me gain both, real world experience, the theoretical experience that I think is necessary for anyone to go on and do anything, that can be successful, debating and competing with the best students from not just Nigeria, but across the world. I competed at Harvard, competed against students from Yale, Stanford, the best schools across the world. Helped develop that sort of emotional and cultural quotient that I think is necessary to navigate cross-cultural communication. which I think is necessary for when you're building a company and you have to interact with stakeholders from different backgrounds, different cultures, different countries, and kind of teach them and be their introduction to what it means to do business in Africa. So for me, I think philosophy gave me everything I need and made me, was a significant contributor to who I eventually became.
Amazing. So you finished philosophy. I think I would love to sort of chart an understanding of how you ended up at Kippa. So you finished university. What did you do next? Like, at what point did you know you wanted to go into, because you went from management consultancy, which is Accenture, into TikTok and growth, and then into Kippa. So at each of those stages, what did you know about what you wanted in your career, and what influenced you to make those steps or take those steps?
Yeah, I mean, it would be tempting to present a picture that's very linear, right? That was like there was absence of clarity at many points in my journey, because I think it's a blessing and a curse to be someone who potentially can do many things and have alternatives. So, like, I know I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, but what would be the best way for me to spend the next 10 years of my life? And so the mental model I fell back to as a competitive debater was, where are the smartest people who I respect, admire, and I'm jealous of? Where are they competing today? Like, are they working at law firms? Are they, studying for PhDs? And what I realized was a ton of them were building companies, or at least trying to build companies. And these were people I respected. And I'm like, okay, if the best, smartest people who I think so highly of are betting their lives and are competing, in this field, I want to throw my hat in the ring. And that's exactly, kind of what led me and my brother, by the way, to start a company. But it was not obvious. When I moved to Beijing initially for grad school, I thought I was going to leave grad school and go into like a top tier consulting firm in the US. So it wasn't obvious. And it wasn't obvious until the last 6 months of grad school that I knew I was going to go on to build a company. And my brother was also a very big influence in that regard.
Incredible. So you went in, and then what was it like raising? So at first you guys raised, I guess publicly what we know about, you were able to raise 3.2 million US dollars in 2021. Now, I'm sure the question on everyone's lips as they're listening is, how on earth do you raise money with just an idea? And also, where do you go to raise 3.2 million to really kick off an idea like Kippa?
Yeah, so firstly, it wasn't without an idea. It wasn't just an idea, right? We had built a product. We had onboarded users. It was an infinitesimal number, around 500 onboarded businesses. But we had a very huge wait list of businesses waiting to sign up on the product. And we, that was kind of all we needed to validate that what we were doing. There were so many other, points of traction that we developed. We spent time, building partnerships with merchant associations, offline merchant associations. So all of that work went in before, we brought more like external capital on board. And to answer your second question, for where do people go to raise capital? From my experience, and this is what I thought before I became a founder, that, you need to go, there's somewhere where you go. From my experience, the job of an investor is to invest. So when they wake up in the morning, all they have to do is to find good companies and try to get money across to them. And I know this because I, tinkered around, worked on a few things. But when we started working on something that had significant market traction, investors found their way to us. So investors will find you. Don't try to spend too much time finding them, especially if you're and it's almost like a barometer for whether or not the business you're building is one that is venture backable. To be very careful, I did not say is successful or will be successful, but venture backable, because I think they are venture backable businesses and they are not. Has nothing to do with whether or not they'll be successful. Is whether or not you're getting that early bite from investors. So their job is to find you as an early stage founder, and every single founder will tell you this. For most people, they had investors come to them during the earlier stages when they started to build a good business.
You mentioned that the investors find you. What things did you do to be found?
Um, so we spent time, we spent a lot of time talking to um, other founders. So one of the things before we started building Kippa is we made a list of companies that were building, much more advanced companies that were building in other emerging markets. We cold emailed the founders, executives at these companies. We got on the phone with them. We asked them deep, meaningful questions. And what we realized was when a founder who has been backed by an investor meets someone who is, who they think is exciting, what they do is they make an introduction. You do not even know, right? For example, we had someone who we spoke to back channel to an investor, like, look, I just spoke to these guys from Nigeria. What they're building seems to be really cool. This is their email. Please reach out to them and learn more. And, so I think in many ways, those conversations that we had as part of our market research process opened the doors for us to start to get investor attention and for them to come to us. So, yeah.
There seems to be a great disconnect or even a disparity between what people believe they should have achieved to be able to raise funding and what actually influences your ability to raise funding to kick off an idea. What three things do you feel, in your experience now, having been through the process not once but twice and getting to the point where you've raised 12 million US dollars, what three things do you feel are most important to then make yourself venture backable, and venture backable being venture capital from initial seed investors or angel investors, etc.?
Yeah, the most important thing I think investors look out for, and to whittle that is down to three things, is the founder. Do I believe that this founder is someone who is backable? And it boils down to very simple things. Do they have knowledge about the market? Can they hire great people? Can they convince other investors to come on board? Are they intelligent? Very simple, basic things that anyone will look out for, right? So that's one, the founder. The second is the market. So if the founder is great, is the market they're building in, or can the market they're building in power $1 billion business? Because that's usually the nominal benchmark for investors. Can this founder build $1 billion business, and can the market accommodate that? So if you're building for a very tiny, slim market, no matter how great you are, no matter how great your product is, it naturally places a cap on how much you can grow. So that's the second thing, the market. And the third thing, for me, it's a non-obvious third thing, but I would say it is the thesis of the fund that you're trying to approach and that's talking to you. For example, there are very specific funds that only invest during the idea stage. There's some that only invest when you have product and some traction. There's some that only invest after you have revenue. There's some that only invest after you have a certain revenue milestone. Right? We only invest after you have $10 million in revenue and post that. So those tend to be growth stage investors. So it's not a good use of your time as an early stage startup to be talking to a growth stage investor. It will be a good conversation, but nothing will ever come out of it because they can not just invest in you. No matter how much they like you, if your stage of the company is not the right fit for their business, then they are not going to give you money. Yeah. So those are the things I would say.
Incredible. Now, statistically, a country like Nigeria, which is where Kippa, is from, there's only about, somewhere between 10 and 20% of the population that uses a smartphone. And there's a lot of talk around, what is the viability of fintech in Africa as a whole. But specifically in somewhere like Nigeria, where the stats say, there's only about 10 to 20% of the population. And we start to look at your numbers and start to look at potential growth just from a simple mathematical calculation based on the number of mobile subscriptions, etc. What was that like starting Kippa in the face of some of these statistics, to people's market perception, and three, the infrastructure challenges. Because I think for most people who have ambitions as big as big as yours, where, you and your brother looked at Kippa and felt like this was ripe for the market, what sort of challenges came to play that perhaps you hadn't considered? Are these statistics actually true? Because there's always, a variation in what actually the research is that's widely available online, and especially when you're looking at foreign investors, that's the only information they have available. So I've asked several questions, but if you can perhaps tackle them as best as you can.
Yeah, so I did see that research. I think it was published by some research firm. I don't remember the name. The idea that 1 to 2 out of every 10 people in Nigeria is a smartphone is false. Like, I think anyone who has actually spent time in Nigeria knows how true that is. That number should be somewhere around 60%. Again, because I very deeply question their research methodology. But yeah, so firstly, I think that number is just wrong. But beyond that, what we've seen is the compounded. I think the number we probably should be looking at is what's the compounded annual growth rate, right, for smartphone penetration and internet penetration alongside, right? And over the past 5 years, it's gotten better. It's gotten cheaper to acquire smartphones. The price of data is falling drastically by almost 100% every year. Like, the availability of data to people even in the most remote areas. Internet coverage is growing pretty rapidly, and this is not to spread an overtly and naively positive image of what that is. But I think the growth potential on the continent is one that is unrivaled, right? However, I still think that there are imminent challenges. In many ways, it's a very poor country. Less than 2% of the population earns more than $300 a month. So it's a very poor population, and a lot of innovation that we expect to see and that we need to see needs to focus on how we enable people to create wealth. And for us, it's at the core of our thesis at Kippa, right? We know for sure that for most small business owners, what wakes them up every morning is they need to make more money, and they need to turn that money into long-term wealth. They want to climb from one rung of the socioeconomic ladder to the next, and doing their business and being diligent at it is part and parcel of that process. And for us, our goal is to support them to enable that wealth creation. So I do think financial technology is necessary, and the innovations we've seen in the past 10 years on the continent have been a net positive. And I do expect that we see more of that in the coming years for sure.
You mentioned earlier that there are different kinds of investors depending on what stage in your business building that you're at. Now, and not to age myself in any way, but there are entrepreneurs like me who were from a time where, raising large amounts of money externally wasn't a thing that we did. And it wasn't as widely available purely because the world is so much more connected now than it was, 15, 20 years ago. Main question here is, do you need to raise funds to make a business successful?
Absolutely not. And I would advise folks to be really thoughtful about whether or not they need to raise money. And of course, it's very hypocritical for me to say, after raising money. But I do think people should spend time, one, understanding what sort of business that their personality is built to. Building a venture-backed business is not rosy, right? And if you care about things like balance, especially in the early days, right? Like work-life balance, and then you probably want to think deeply about that. Yeah, I mean, I think there are people who are able to manage it, and God bless them. But it's not really rosy. So you have to figure out what your personality is built to accommodate. You also have to figure out, and I think that level of self awareness for whether or not your business is venture backable is super important. So venture capitalists are money managers. They manage money on behalf of other people. So very wealthy people, institutions, foundations, endowments give venture capitalist funds to deploy on their behalf and make them a return. Most times venture capitalists lose money, but the one or two or three or five times they make money out of an investment in like 100 companies, the 3 to 5 companies that will succeed make up for the 95 companies that fail. So that's kind of how it's high risk, high reward in many ways for venture capitalists. And you have to think from the perspective of them. How do you see your company fitting into their portfolio construct? Do you think you're a company that has the potential? I remember the earlier things I mentioned: founder, market, stage of fund, and I mean the other things like the team, the products, and all of that, right? Are you a company that potentially in the next 5 years can become a $1 billion company? And that's just something to think about. The time matters because they have to return their fund in 5 years, and the scale of the return also matters.
For most people, they raise funds, right? Either to increase their revenue or to recruit more talent, or to be able to be in control of sort of their marketing, lobbying, and in some ways also to spend less time persuading potential investors, right? Or building out, the rewards along their customer base, or in some cases just to get a control of their company. And you mentioned the pitfalls of raising external funding. And I guess without stating the obvious, the one thing that you kind of said, it was, the hours you put in, etc. But it's more than that, right? It's having a boss, right? Depending on how much you give of your company to an investor. It's losing some level of autonomy because now you have to answer to a business plan or to answer to your investors who are expecting a certain return profile. Do you mind sharing perhaps some of your learnings from being in a position where the structure of your business is now beyond you as the visionary, but you as the visionary in and amongst investors who have expectations of the business, and of you and your brother, the founders?
But yeah, that's a very critical element of having other stakeholders. And it really pushes what your relationship with authority is, right? A lot of investors, no investor will know more about your business than you do. No investor would be able to make decisions for what's right for the business than you. Of course, you have to get investor buy-in. You have to get the buy-in of your board and your team. And I think that capacity for communication is one that is important. So how you do things matter, but at the end of the day, decision making and the responsibility for the success or failure of those decisions are on you. You're not going to succeed because you have a very fancy investor who tells you what to do. You're not. If anything, it's probably going to, achieve the opposite of that.
You mentioned raising money and you reaching out to people and your cold calls, etc. I think one of the things people tend to underestimate is that raising money is a full-time job in itself, and it costs money to actually raise money. Do you mind sort of speaking on your experience of the costs of raising money and the time it takes to raise money? Because I think we read the headlines, right? But no one is aware of exactly what the opportunity costs are.
Yeah, for sure. It's probably one of the most emotionally difficult things you do, because as everyone who has raised money knows you get a lot of people tell you no. you get very conflicting feedback, unsolicited opinion about the direction of your business, but you just have to understand that that's par for the course. Any fundraising round takes anywhere from 1 to 6 months. Sometimes it even takes longer than that before they close, and it's this constant grueling process of. And what's worse is you do not know how it will go until the last minute. So you can be in a process for 3 months, and at the end of that, it doesn't go through, but you've just spent 3 months that you otherwise would spend focusing your energy exclusively on building your company, trying to fundraise. Yeah.
Everyone's talking about, the perfect pitch. I think since Steve Jobs made pitching a thing, you go on Google and there are, you can access Facebook's pitch, because everyone believes that because Facebook is the success that it is, their pitch is what was the variable that made that possible. How important is that pitch in the process?
It's very important, of course, I think it's off-putting when people are overly theatrical and sound too rehearsed and crammed, and it's very impersonal. But practicing your pitch, understanding and tailoring it for every investor is very important. So that means doing your homework on what investor you're talking to in advance and tailoring. So what are they interested in? Are they more interested in product? I met an investor who's like, our fund is really excited about the potential of data. So of course that pitch is going to be, look, this is all of the potential that our platform has from a data perspective, and going ready armed with that. Because delivering a generic pitch, it's so easy. Investors are here, hundreds of pitches every month. So they can tell a rehearsed generic pitch from one that is bespoke to them. So I think that's important. And it's important not just because the pitch is flowery and they want to hear like a 15-minute flowery speech, but it just shows that you're someone who is intelligent, thoughtful, and patient enough to prepare for the things that you need to do.
Kippa is designed for small businesses. You could have designed a business for, larger corporates in a market like Nigeria who have more stability. Was there a particular reason why you chose small businesses?
Absolutely. Small businesses transact 60% of the GDP. They employ 84% of the entire labor force. 96% of all businesses in Nigeria are small businesses. So and no one has built for them. So we think there's a lot of deep meaning with building for them. Accelerating the transformation of the economy would happen when small businesses are catered to. And we already think big corporates have enough people serving them, to be honest. And they're not going to fail, neither their revenue is going to drop if, more companies do not build for them. But small businesses traditionally have been laggards when it comes to the adoption of tools, systems, processes that help them grow. And that's why we exist.
Amazing. What would you say your greatest learning has been in, you've been able to achieve an incredible amount in a very short space of time. What would some of your greatest learnings be?
The biggest lesson for me is this has been as much of an emotional journey as it has been one where I'm building a business and trying to generate financial outcome, right? What that means is if you're trying to build a company, especially at the highest level, with all of the different moving pieces, you're going to learn a lot about yourself, issues, questions that you've avoided confronting about yourself. You have to deal with them and face them head on. Your strengths and your weaknesses are highlighted and brought to the fore for everyone to see, especially yourself. That has definitely been my biggest learning. That in order for you to succeed, you have to do some house cleaning for sure.
You mentioned both your parents are university professionals, so academia. How did they take you wanting to create a business, right? So, for most African parents, they want their children in a stable job with a stable with a stable prospect of a future. How did that conversation go with your parents around you leaving, somewhere like TikTok where there was a lot of growth and prospect, or even Accenture to say that not just you, but you and your brother were breaking away to start a business?
Yeah, no, my parents have always trusted me from a very young age, especially to make decisions. And I think that's one of the things I'm very blessed to have, like just incredible amount of belief from them. Right? They believe I would succeed. They believe that I would do well. Like if I tell them I am going to, like I don't know, like no matter what it is, think of the most ridiculous thing. They'll be like, I trust you, you'll be fine. And having that level of belief and, really kind of puts me on my toes in the best way possible and um, you know, makes me feel very grounded.
Has that been an important part of being able to sort of face the no's and the doors that get shut in your face along the journey?
Um, in some ways, I don't think it's directly being the reason why, or a part of the reason why. I think my ability to deal with that is just rooted in look, like that's how it's the Matthew principle, right? Like most things tend to, or anything that is of value tends to skew towards the tip of the tail. So it's like, okay, if I have to get through 100 no's, like the earlier I get to them, the better for me. So that's how I think of it. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, failing, like, my building a relationship with failure in whatever form it manifests itself. Like failure is, I want to do something. I really wanted something. I couldn't get it. And having to make peace with that is integral for anyone who will become successful. And I'm trying to become successful. And so making peace with that is incredibly important right now.
You mentioned success. I think one of the things that I've learned, and also through each episode in the podcast, is that for a lot of people, success is different. What does success mean to you?
Success is living very fully, living a meaningful life very fully without boundaries. Um, and I know I'm successful when I'm able to do that. Yeah, and pursuing whatever interest I want and creating whatever change I want to see in the world without boundaries. Um, that's success for me. Of course, like, in many ways, success for me is also being able to take care of my family. Very, very important to me, and the people I love.
Amazing. You mentioned a few of the influences to you and your brother starting Kippa, but I would be keen to understand, where does the passion come from?
It's one I think about a lot for myself too, right? Where does it come from? And even more philosophically, like, and more like, it's like, how do we create more people who are very passionate about whatever it is they're interested in? And it's a question I ask myself a lot. Um, but I do think it's a combination of things. It's a combination of, growing up in a country where there's quite a lot of challenges where you, by default, have to be above average to be fine, to be okay.
Yeah.
Um, I think it does imbue you with a certain level of passion. But at some point that expires and it goes beyond that. You have to replace that with a different, um, you know, with a different set of motivations. And for me, I think a lot of my passion today lies in my interest to play at the edge of my potential, right? It's like I believe that everything that we do here, it is almost like, God's potential manifesting itself at the most refined form. And for me, it's like, how can I continue to refine my potential and sharpen it um, to the point where I feel like I'm truly playing at the maximum limit of what it is I could be. And that's why, no matter how things good seem on the outside, if I feel like I'm not doing that, God, I feel very bad. Like I can have a bad month if I feel like in the past 30 days I've not done things that have allowed me live, to the limit of my potential. I've not worked as hard as I think I could. No matter how good that month went financially and on the books, it was a bad month for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're your own hardest critic, right? So I think, being Nigerian, and one of the things that I've learned about entrepreneurship over the years is that it can be a very lonely journey. And there is a turning point in lifestyle, being you don't have as much time as your friends who are in regular jobs do, where socially you get left behind, or you're just no longer included because you can never make it. Your daily struggles are completely different to what your peers are going through. And then you have the headlines, right, that come out, raised 3.5 million, raised 12 million. Now everybody thinks that money is in your bank account. And so your life should be so different. And you should be the guy who's paying for all the drinks, and, success has arrived. How are you different from the Kennedy who had no outside funding to the Kennedy who now has 12.1 million US dollars in his business that everybody knows about?
I think anyone who knows me would say I'm exactly still the same person. I don't think anything about me has changed. I mean, for a lot of founders, right? Like the material difference in your life comes when you sell your company, or you exit, you IPO, and that hasn't happened for me. So in many ways, I'm still exactly the same person that I know. My interests are still very similar. I don't know that there's anything I do now that is different from things I've done before. And I don't have that many friends, to be frank with you, right? I do have a lot of acquaintances, but I don't have that many friends. So in terms of how it's affected my friendships, it's absolutely not. Still exactly the same thing. Wherever I can, like, be valuable to people, I still try to be that. Maybe what has changed is I'm just a lot busier, so I'm more selfish with my time. I think that has changed for sure.
What's the most common myth about your industry, right? So everyone on the tips of their tongues is talking about the potential of fintech in Africa, especially Nigeria. What's the most common myth that you've encountered about your industry?
Myth. Um, when I tell people, especially people not in the industry, about my work, it sounds very boring. It's just like, okay, like, why you seem like such an interesting guy? This is such boring work, but I can see what they mean. But it's probably one of the most interesting things, and building in this space, you can do. There's a lot of support that exists in terms of like partners, and infrastructure that you need to build. So for me, it's just like it's a very exciting intellectual endeavor, to walk through this maze for sure. So I think it's more and more exciting than people give it credit for.
What keeps you up at night? More money, more problems, they
Um,
say.
Well, a lot of what keeps me up at night, it stems from, the what I said earlier about dealing with your own, like doing your own housekeeping. And a lot of times I'm up at night. Logically, I have no reason to be. But it stems from, things like, oh, I am, worried about something I did or haven't done that I want to do. Or just thinking about how I could have, handled specific scenarios, like, interactions better. Um, but generally, you're right. It's very alienating and lonely being in a position of leadership, and I think that's something that's not talked about enough. And
Especially when you're young, when you're young
yeah,
doing
yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah, it is.
Most of your peers are starting their careers in companies and they're the most junior person in a team. And you're in your sort of early 20s and you're running a big business with, 60 plus employees. I started my first business in my 20s. And I remember sort of hiring or even some of the dynamics with people you hire and staff. How have you navigated that?
You mean what do you mean the age like difference and managing that, or just managing hires?
The age difference. So being in your 20s and running a business.
It's from my experience so far, especially with managing people, that hasn't been a thing, right? So like when we're working, and it's also because the culture on the team is one where we like every day I show up to work, I have to earn my own shirt, right? I have to earn my place. I have to earn my position. You can't hack your way to being a chief executive by building a company and employing people. And like, no, like, I think organizations that are set up in such a way that the people at the top have to continue to fight to be at the top, they do the best. That's the organization that Kippa is, and um, so for me, I understand that to be here, and in many ways, it's a chip on my shoulder in some way, right? Because I do know that there are people who think because you're young, like it's easy for them to chalk anything up to, oh, you're so young. It's like everyone looks for
Totally.
excuses for why, oh yeah, you're young. That's why you made this decision. It's like it's
Totally.
bullshit. Like that's not true. You're just
Yeah.
looking. It's lazy thinking on anyone's part. But so all of that to say, it's not been a factor that that comes up. It just I don't even see any world in which it can possibly be. When I work with people. So yeah.
Amazing. How much of it has been mindset for you?
Um, a lot of it, I think, I started to punch above my weight class from when I was very young. Yeah, and honestly, I like when I'm on my own, I don't think like, oh God, I'm 24. Like, wow, how cool is that? Or how young is that? Like, I don't know, like the way everyone probably feels, the way a 60-year-old probably goes around the world just like not counting what their age. Like, I don't think like I think of, it's like I've had all of this, privileges, I've had all of the not privileges, I've had all of this opportunity, right? So the output from all of the opportunity, like there's commensurate responsibility. And so for me, it's just living out the responsibility. I don't care if I'm 40 and I have that amount of responsibility. I'm 24 and I have that. It's just you've had this opportunity, and there's a responsibility for you to turn that into something meaningful. And that's just what I'm doing. So there's no without recourse to how young am I, how much of a victim am I, how much of a superhero am I. Like I don't really think of things on any of those extremes.
Yeah. It'll be interesting having you on the show again in a decade from now.
Oh my God.
And I will ask you the
Yeah.
exact same question.
I'm very interested in seeing how my answers evolve after a decade. I'm like, Kennedy, you probably were naive, but who knows?
I think I will definitely look forward to asking you that question again in 10 years' time. Because I think life would have happened, right? And the responsibility you carry now will be infinitely greater. So there's a part of ignorance being bliss, which is incredible to hear.
Yeah, for sure. That's important. One of the things I also want to make sure I do not want to forget any aspect of what I'm going through or feeling right now. That's very important to me. So, because I think there tends to be a glorification of the past. It's like, oh, times were easy, times were good, and it's almost like nostalgia montages our experience and presents only the best version of it to us. And I really want to remember everything I'm going through right now, everything I'm feeling right now. So, in the future, it's just a lot more clear in what ways I was wrong or right.
Well, in fairness, you and your brother are building a business with the backdrop of a narrative of the youth and the young population in Nigeria, right? So in so many ways, when you speak of responsibility, I can understand where that comes from, right? The whole world saw NSARS, the whole world saw, a president speak badly about, the future of a country because they didn't believe in the youth. The whole world has seen a generation of young Nigerians battling to be heard, and to be seen, and to be in a position where there are opportunities for them to be their best selves. So when I think of, what your generation have had to live through, one, and two, perhaps in some ways, the gates that are open for your generation that perhaps weren't open for older generations. You guys have references of peers who are making, who are successful in other endeavors, right? Creative cultural arts. We have huge megastars as musicians who are your peers. You have so many other reference points than, say, the average African did 20 years ago. The landscape is different, but it's not easy, because I think there are other challenges that your generation are facing, right? Where some of those things, the level of instability, say for instance, in education across the continent has been incredibly challenging, I would say, in the last 5 years. Whether we're looking at, the unrest that have happened, even down to today in Sudan, right? Your generation of Africans, while it seems that there are endless possibilities, you guys are having to navigate through some really challenging political climates. Saying that, what advice do you feel has been one of the best that you've received from a mentor or someone that you respect?
Good question. I do think on the climate and the challenges we have to face, I tend to err on the side of we have it better than it's ever been. And I don't think the political climate now is worse than it was in the 70s in Nigeria and the 80s. Like in many ways it's gotten better but worse at the same time, right? But for me, I tend to focus on things I can control and things that are within my purview versus, more grandiose versions of like how the system is set up negatively against me. So, a lot of the advice I've found very useful, tend to bother around or bother on me as an individual, as Kennedy, who's trying to do what I can to make my own mark in the world, right? And one of the most beautiful pieces of feedback I got from one of my mentors in 2019 was to take the most direct route to my future, right? And that was in response to a conversation I had with her about fear-based decision making and some things I was afraid of. And I was going to make a decision because I was afraid, and just take a detour around it. And it's like, no, take the most direct route to your future. That thing you want to do in 10 years, just do it now. Like, let go of the fear, let go of all it. Like, be open to failure, be more open to failure. And I think that has and continues to drive my appetite for risk taking, especially as a businessman. And also just as an individual too,
I guess my last question would be, what do you wish you knew?
What do I wish I knew? So I'm not a technical founder, and I feel, and I wish I, deeply, knew how to write code, and that's something I'm actually starting to learn. So it's one that it's not annoying. I've been annoyed at myself for it. I'm going to start to chip away against that.
Amazing. Kennedy, thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of Third Culture Africans. Where do people find you?
Sure. Easiest, best place to find me is on Instagram. Kennedy, that's Ekezie. Kennedy, I'll just spell that, Ekezie. And same name on LinkedIn, Kennedy Ekezie on LinkedIn. Those are the best places to find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I look forward to following your journey. His links are in the show notes. So get a link, go on, follow, like. He has an incredible newsletter where he shared some tidbits. So I will help you say KennedyEkezie.com for those who are interested in his newsletter. And thank you again for tuning in on this week's episode of Third Culture Africans. And we'll see you next week. Thank you to over 20,000 of you that have tuned in and have continued to tune in. Because of you, our show is now distributed on Vodacom Africa's platform, My Muse. Your support helps make this show bigger and better. If you're a fan of the show, we would love to know. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and join our community with weekly newsletters curated just for you. Check out our free resources on entrepreneurship, productivity, finance, and leadership at thirdcultureafricans.com. You can now catch special episodes with video on YouTube at Third Culture Africans. Let's connect on Instagram and Facebook at Third Culture Africans. Let's do this.